I'm a fan of TikTok. My kids like TikTok. Young people love TikTok. If we can keep it going, good. We're going to watch the security concerns, and we have buyers, American buyers. We have American buyers. And I haven't spoken to President Xi about it. At the right time when we're set, I'll do it. In the meantime, until the complexity of things work out, we just extend a little bit.
All right, y'all. Somebody tag Officer Brandon Tatum, because what's happening right now is wild. Think about it. One day, TikTok is banned across the US. The next day, Trump's back in office and suddenly the ban disappears. Now here's where it gets interesting. The app ends up in the hands of Oracle, owned by a billionaire with deep political ties, and right around the same time, Israel's leadership starts talking about using platforms like TikTok to shape global narratives. See the pattern yet? Yeah, it's way bigger than just a social media app. Somebody tag Officer Brandon Tatum. On January 19, 2025, TikTok was officially suspended across the United States after government officials expressed concerns about ByteDance, the Chinese parent company, having excessive access to American users' data. This move quickly sparked backlash, especially among conservatives who viewed it as unnecessary interference and a potential violation of digital freedom. However, the situation shifted just a day later. When Donald Trump was sworn in as president on January 20th, one of his first major actions was to pause or roll back the ban on TikTok. The decision left many people wondering what motivated this sudden reversal and what message it sent about data privacy and global tech influence.
And the algorithm, I know this is a question many of you have had, will be secured, retrained, and operated in the United States outside of ByteDance's control.
Trump made it clear that he's actually a fan of TikTok, and rather than rushing the sale, he wanted to delay it so he could speak directly with the Chinese president. His goal, at least on paper, was to find a way for TikTok's US operations to be sold to American investors. On the surface, that sounded like a win, keeping the platform under American control. But hold that thought. We'll circle back to it later. Now, let's shift focus to Officer Brandon Tatum. He's often described as a black conservative, married to a white woman, and his influence is primarily aimed at black audiences. That's supposed to be his area of expertise, addressing issues affecting black Americans. In many of his conversations, Tatum emphasizes that black communities lag behind in wealth because they allegedly don't invest or build generational assets. But when challenged on who's responsible for teaching these skills, he tends to deflect, suggesting that black people should simply learn on their own, without external guidance. Unlike conservative figures such as Charlie Kirk, Tatum's brand centers on discussions within the black community, yet there's an underlying tension that many observers can't ignore. And when we revisit TikTok, the story takes an interesting turn. The app was eventually sold to Oracle, an American company owned by Larry Ellison, a billionaire who happens to be Jewish. So after all that political back and forth, what really changed?
Police will be on their best behavior because we're constantly watching and recording everything that's going on. Citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on.
Did you all catch that? The TikTok algorithm in the United States is set to be completely retrained. While users will still be able to view videos from creators around the world, the US version of the app will now operate under Oracle's control. In other words, the way content is recommended, ranked, and circulated will be shaped by a new system, one overseen entirely on American soil. And that's worth noting, because Larry Ellison, the billionaire behind Oracle, has long emphasized his desire for tight oversight and control in every venture he's part of. Here, Trump begins discussing the future of artificial intelligence, suggesting that in the years ahead, AI could shape or even oversee nearly all human interactions. On the surface, that idea sounds promising, AI ensuring accountability, transparency, and fairness. But as with most technological shifts, there's a deeper layer worth examining. Around the same time, Israeli politicians were recorded expressing the need to impose tighter controls on social media, arguing that online platforms shouldn't be allowed to spread what they describe as brutal propaganda. Their comments added another piece to an already complex global conversation about who gets to control online speech and how far regulation should go. This, of course, didn't sit well with certain voices on the far right, who see such measures as direct censorship. Figures like Nick Fuentes went so far as to claim that a small but powerful foreign nation holds sway over America's political and media systems, a statement heavy with implication, though he never explicitly named the country. His frustration reflects a broader tension among extremist circles, where concerns about foreign influence, AI control, and digital regulation are blending into one uneasy narrative. And just when it seemed the conversation couldn't get more tangled, the story continues to unfold. Whether people like him or not, Benjamin Netanyahu is known for being direct. He doesn't hide behind vague language or political niceties. When he speaks, he makes his intentions clear. Recently, he acknowledged that Israel's image in the United States has faced growing criticism from certain groups, and has been very open about wanting to rebuild and strengthen that support base. His strategy, however, goes beyond traditional diplomacy. In a candid discussion, Netanyahu explained that a significant part of this effort involves financial influence and strategic communication, recognizing that modern conflicts aren't fought with weapons alone. Instead, he emphasized the importance of influence operations, particularly through digital platforms. He even drew comparisons to old-fashioned warfare, saying that just as swords and cavalry no longer define the battlefield, today's battles are fought online, in the realm of social media. Among those digital arenas, Netanyahu specifically pointed to TikTok and X, formerly Twitter, as the most critical platforms. He described them as the new tools of engagement, capable of shaping narratives and swaying public opinion on a global scale. And as he put it plainly, ensuring influence over such platforms could be consequential for Israel's long-term image and strategic goals. So, let's take a step back for a second. Netanyahu made it clear that one of his top strategic goals was to gain influence over TikTok, emphasizing how crucial control of that platform could be. He even expressed hope that the Oracle deal, which ultimately did go through, would succeed. Now, looking at this in hindsight, Donald Trump's administration appeared focused on ensuring TikTok's U.S. operations were sold to an American company. But according to some observers, Trump's preferred buyer was Oracle, owned by Larry Ellison, a billionaire of Jewish heritage. This has led to speculation that the move could, at least in theory, align with Israel's broader interests, especially given Netanyahu's public remarks about leveraging social media influence and funding pro-Israel voices online. Netanyahu even referenced efforts to sponsor influencers who could help shape narratives in Israel's favor, arguing that if critics of Israel were paying for influence, then his side should too. This, understandably, sparked concerns about how much control and narrative-shaping power might rest in the hands of those backing the platform. Meanwhile, shifting back to Brandon Tatum, his role within the Black conservative community has come under growing scrutiny. Early in his career, Tatum often echoed talking points appealing to white conservative audiences, downplaying racism and suggesting that Black Americans were largely responsible for their own struggles. Those views helped him rise quickly within certain circles, but they also began to alienate portions of his Black audience, especially when critics accused him of defending the white power structure rather than speaking truthfully about systemic issues. What started as a message of empowerment began to be seen by many as pandering, and that shift cost Tatum credibility among those who once supported him most. In one exchange, a listener confronted Brandon Tatum, saying, "I'm 30 years old, and from what I've experienced, racism is absolutely real. It's systemic. For you not to see that is hurtful and confusing." The frustration was clear. While Tatum often claims to represent the Black community, many felt his rhetoric dismissed the reality of systemic inequality. Over time, critics argue that Tatum shifted his focus, moving from simply criticizing Black people and appealing to white conservative audiences to becoming a more visible figure within pro-Israel conservative spaces. This evolution became more apparent in his connection with Turning Point USA, a major right-wing youth organization. Turning Point has long been associated with donors and advocacy groups supportive of Israel, and its leadership, including Charlie Kirk, has received significant backing from those circles. Tatum, as one of Turning Point's prominent personalities, began aligning his public stance accordingly. As Israel ramped up its campaign against what it views as hate speech targeting Zionists, Tatum increasingly took a pro-Israel position, publicly expressing support for the state and its policies. What makes this shift striking is that Tatum originally branded himself as a Black conservative, someone who claimed to advocate for Black empowerment and personal accountability. Yet, as his career advanced, his messaging appeared to align more with institutional conservative interests, and, some critics argue, with foreign influence narratives tied to Israel's broader media strategy. In short, the man who once claimed to speak for the Black community now seems to be representing the talking points of the political donors backing him, leaving many of his early supporters questioning where his true lies. Brandon Tatum often presents himself as a diversity voice, someone supposedly working to connect conservative ideas with young Black audiences. But according to critics, that image is far from reality. They argue that Tatum's loyalty doesn't lie with the Black community, but rather with whoever funds his platform. If the money flows from white conservatives, That's where he aligns. If support comes from pro-Israel interests, he adjusts his message accordingly. Despite branding himself as a voice for Black empowerment, there's no clear record of Tatum investing in or collaborating with Black-led initiatives, businesses, or community projects. Many conservatives, both Black and white, have positioned him as a bridge to the Black community, yet his actions suggest otherwise. Increasingly, observers see him as a paid operative, someone who strategically shifts narratives based on the agenda of his financial backers. This puts Tatum in a complicated position. On one side, he appeals to audiences who have been hostile toward Black activism. On the other, he aligns himself with geopolitical causes that have little to do with the issues he once claimed to represent. Trying to manage both has begun to hurt his credibility, and it's likely to cost him followers. After all, as the saying goes, not all money is good money. And in Tatum's case, chasing influence may have come at the expense of authenticity. At this point, critics suggest that Brandon Tatum should seriously consider stepping back from speaking on issues concerning Black America, particularly because his record shows little to no genuine involvement in the community he often claims to represent. Over the years, many have noticed a growing disconnect between Tatum's commentary and the real struggles facing everyday Black Americans. While he continues to speak authoritatively on topics like crime, culture, and responsibility, critics argue that his words are shaped less by lived experience or community engagement and more by the political and financial incentives tied to his platform. Rather than focusing on building tangible solutions, such as promoting entrepreneurship, supporting education, or investing in local initiatives, Tatum's energy appears increasingly centered on defending global political interests that have little to do with the realities of Black life in America. His public persona has evolved from a grassroots voice of accountability to what some describe as a media representative for white conservative networks and their ideological allies abroad. In doing so, he seems to have abandoned the very demographic he once claimed to uplift. The issue, critics say, isn't just about who funds him, it's about how that funding shapes his message. When Tatum consistently echoes talking points that deflect from systemic injustice, downplay racism, or shift blame entirely onto the Black community, it creates a narrative that conveniently aligns with the interests of those already in power. The problem becomes even clearer when his alliances are considered. Many of the networks and figures who have supported his rise are also tied to pro-Israel and global conservative movements, which have their own agendas regarding media control and public opinion. By attaching himself to these causes, Tatum has positioned himself as a political mouthpiece rather than a community advocate. In essence, his voice no longer reflects the lived experiences of those he claims to speak for. Instead, it amplifies perspectives that seek to neutralize conversations about racial inequality, replacing them with rhetoric about personal responsibility and self-reliance, ideas that, while important, can become weapons of dismissal when used to ignore broader structural barriers. What's more, by aligning with foreign influence narratives and corporate donors, Tatum has blurred the line between commentator and operative, raising questions about whether his commentary serves truth or sponsorship. Observers note that this transformation didn't happen overnight. In the early stages of his career, Tatum positioned himself as a refreshing alternative voice within conservative circles, someone who could challenge stereotypes and encourage internal growth within the Black community. However, as his profile grew and his connections deepened, the tone of his messaging shifted dramatically. Now, rather than promoting unity or empowerment, his platform often serves to divide, painting critics as complainers, labeling systemic injustice as a myth, and mocking Black activists who call for equity. This pattern, many argue, reveals a man more invested in validation from political patrons than accountability to the community he speaks about. The irony, of course, is that Tatum still markets himself as a bridge, someone who helps conservative audiences understand Black America. But bridges are meant to connect. Tatum's version seems to separate and isolate, turning empathy into suspicion and reducing cultural discussions to talking points that score clicks but lack depth. In chasing influence and recognition, he has lost the very authenticity that made his early message resonate. Moreover, his involvement in defending geopolitical narratives, particularly those surrounding Israel and its influence over social media, has further distanced him from domestic concerns. By entering that arena, Tatum has tied himself to ideological power structures that use media and influence as tools of persuasion. For critics, this signals a complete transformation from cultural commentator to strategic spokesperson, someone whose words now serve global interests rather than communal progress. The consequence of this evolution is becoming increasingly apparent. As Tatum's rhetoric hardens, his audience narrows. Many former supporters, particularly within the Black community, are beginning to see through the polished branding and recognize a pattern of performative advocacy. They point out that while Tatum criticizes others for playing the victim, he himself often plays the role of contrarian celebrity, monetising controversy rather than fostering understanding. Ultimately, his story serves as a cautionary tale about what happens when influence overtakes integrity. The pursuit of visibility and sponsorship can easily transform sincere commentary into scripted performance. And when that happens, even the most vocal advocates lose touch with the very people they claim to represent. At the end of the day, many believe that if Brandon Tatum really wants to regain credibility, he must reconnect with the community, not through speeches or sound bites, but through action, collaboration, and humility. Until then, his critics argue, he should refrain from positioning himself as an authority on Black America because his current trajectory serves everyone but the people he claims to champion. And with that, as Ashay Duke Jackson would say, it's your boy, back at it again with another episode of the Celebrity Junk. Appreciate y'all for tuning in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell. We out.